This rhetoric of aggrievement and class warfare and my challenges are because somebody else is successful. That's not a positive American narrative.
Welcome to In the Green Room at the Heritage Foundation. My name is Lachlan Marquet, and today we are honored to be joined by Dr. Condoleezza Rice, the former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under George W. Bush. She is currently a professor of political science at Stanford University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Dr. Rice, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
So I wanted to start with North Korea, given events yesterday, a failed missile launch that could end up sinking a food aid deal with the United States. There's been speculation that there might be a nuclear test as a way to save face. How would you suggest we respond to yesterday's events?
Well, I think we do have to give a strong signal to the North Koreans that this is unacceptable, and unfortunately, perhaps it has to be through food aid. One of the sad things about the need to use food aid in this way, though, is that, of course, there are people in North Korea who are starving and who need our compassion, and we have generally not used food as a weapon. But it might also be possible to get now the countries that constituted the six-party talks, minus North Korea, China, South Korea, Japan, Russia, and ourselves together to go to the UN for some further sanctions.
Now, moving from a nuclear power to an aspiring one, there will be talks in Istanbul this weekend between Tehran and 6 major world powers, including the U.S., over their nuclear program. Do you expect a meaningful resolution to emerge from those talks?
Well, the Iranians are under a lot of pressure. The sanctions have been growing. The isolation has been growing. This is something that was begun in 2006 as we brought into being the P5+1, the Permanent 5 plus Germany. And it's, I think, having an impact. But whether it is enough to bring the Iranians around, I think, is still a question. Probably the most important thing we could do when we go to the talks is not to offer to begin to lessen sanctions, because that takes the pressure off, and also to remind the Iranians that the President of the United States does have a military option, and he's prepared to use it. When we chatter about how hard it is to use military power, it would be such a mess, that lets the Iranians off the hook. I think the only way that they're going to come to some resolution, if they indeed will, is if there is both a coercive option through military power and through sanctions.
If Iran continues to pursue its nuclear program even after these talks, is a military strike either from Israel or the United States, is that inevitable?
Well, if the Iranians are close to the place where they cannot be stopped from acquiring a nuclear weapon, then I don't think there is any other option. I don't know whether it would be Israel, although I don't think the Israelis will ask for permission. And it might well be that the President of the United States has no other option. The Iranians have to believe, in any case, that the President of the United States would have no other option.
Now, complicating the issue has been Russia amassing troops on Iran's border and essentially warning the United States and Israel against any potential strike there. If Iran is attacked, would Russia, do you think they would engage in military hostilities against the United States or against Israel?
It's really hard for me to believe that this is a fight that the Russians want. The Russians have a tendency sometimes to bluff on these things. I can remember very well when they were flying bombers as old as I am down the coast of Venezuela, saying that they were protecting Venezuela, and I remember thinking, oh, come on, that doesn't change the balance of power. I can't believe that the Russians want any part of this fight. In fact, the Iranians are a problem for the Russians. They stir up trouble in the Caucasus. I think the Russians know that a nuclear weapon in the hands of the Iranians would make the Middle East even more volatile than it is today. And so I think we probably ought to warn the Russians that it's not a good idea to get involved in this fight, because we also don't want any miscalculation between Russia and the United States.
Now, Russia has also been something of a thorn in the side with respect to Syria. What is their interest in protecting the Assad regime, and what can the United States do in the face of intransigence from the Kremlin?
Well, Syria has long been, even in the times of the Soviet Union, the Russians' most strategic, valued ally in the region. And they use it both in terms of economic benefit. It's a place to which they happen to sell a lot of weapons. Russian weapons aren't that popular in a lot of the world. They are in Syria. It's a place from which they've had a platform to influence the Middle East from Damascus. And so I understand why it is that they have this view. But one has to say to the Russians, and to that, for that matter, to the Chinese, that we're not prepared to let Syria continue down this road of mowing down its own people. And even if the Assad regime stops killing its own people, we have to remember that the instability now in Syria has the potential to fall over into Lebanon, Turkey, and other places, even Iraq, as it is already doing.
Now, with respect to American policy towards Russia, the president was recently caught on an open mic moment saying he would have more flexibility to deal with the Russians after the elections. What did you make of that comment?
Well, I was a little unnerved by it, frankly, because it was, I guess, in the context of missile defense. Mm-hmm. And the president has made several representations to people who supported the START Treaty, including myself, who supported the START Treaty, that this would have no implications for U.S. missile defense. That, in fact, we were not going to give Russia any kind of veto on a fulsome charge toward the most technologically sophisticated missile defense system that we can possibly build. We've just seen a North Korean missile test. Yes, it failed, but the next time it might succeed. And I remember in 2006 that we actually used the small, at that time very small and incipient capability for missile defense that we had to protect some of American territory. And so missile defense is extremely important in the face of North Korea and Iran. So I hope the president was not suggesting that that flexibility would include signing on to agreements that might try to recreate the old anti-ballistic missile treaty from which we withdrew in 2002.
Now, on a more general note, how can U.S. policymakers best convince a war-weary nation with significant economic problems here at home to continue being engaged in global affairs?
Well, the first thing is to admit that Americans are a bit tired. And I take some responsibility for that. All of us who, after 9/11, I know it was war and it was terrorism and it was constant vigilance and it was exhausting. But we have to go back to the American people and say, we don't have an option but to lead. History abhors a vacuum. And if we don't lead, somebody will. And that will be a country that does not favor a balance of power that favors freedom. And that will be dangerous not just for our values, but for our interests as well. And that leadership has to be accompanied by a recognition that America is exceptional. If you tell the American people that we're just like everybody else, we should represent the lowest common denominator will of the international community, they're not going to want to make the sacrifices that come with leadership. But we have a view of how human history ought to unfold. And we have made a difference because we've had that view in Europe and in Latin America and in Africa and now in the Middle East. We've made a difference. And so I believe that the American people can be rallied again. But it can't be in the absence of a recognition that we do have issues of internal repair. Some of what has made us exceptional, a belief that the power of the individual, that it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going, that you can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things. A lot of that is under assault. This rhetoric of aggrievement and class warfare and my challenges are because somebody else is successful. That's not a positive American narrative. And I think it is sapping our strength to believe that we have something special to say in the world. And so I believe we can do it, but it doesn't help to pretend that we have nothing special to say in the world.
And finally, you left some very big shoes to fill at State. How would you rate Secretary Clinton's performance thus far?
Well, Secretary Clinton is a friend of mine. I first met her when she came to bring her freshman daughter to Stanford when I was provost of the university. And I'm very fond of her. I think she has tried to represent American interests and values. She's a patriot. I haven't agreed with everything, but I do believe that there's been a stronger voice, perhaps there, than any place else in the administration for the view that American power matters, and a kind of toughness about some of the adversaries. And so I applaud that, and I wish her the very best. It's a tough job, and it's a lot easier out here than it is in there.
Dr. Rice, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
For the Heritage Foundation, I'm Lachlan Marquet.